Have you been in the Texas Panhandle and looked out into an open area of grassland? Well, if you've been outside the city limits and you've done that, chances are you've probably seen a windmill or maybe two. A lot of people don't give much thought about the American windmill, how long it's been there, how did it get here, and things of that nature. Ranches around the world still use windmills today. And today I'm going to talk to you about the origin of the American windmill, the working mechanics of the windmill, and then also a new modern day windmill. Windmills have been around for hundreds of years, first used in Persia and then adopted by the Chinese culture. But the windmill that's most used today was built in 1854. According to the Texas State Historical Association, Daniel Holiday from Ellington, Connecticut, built the first American windmill that is still being widely used around the world today. In the 1900s, the windmill had already shipped from Connecticut down to Houston and then back up to through the Texas Panhandle. It wasn't until 1915 that the last change was made to the American windmill, still by Daniel Holiday, adding a compartment for oil. Before this compartment was there, the gears would get dry and the motor would lock up. But from 1915 all the way up until present day, we still use the same mechanical dynamics for the American windmill. Which brings me to my next point. The windmill is a simple but functional mechanism, not requiring a whole lot of work. The wheel that sits on top of the windmill spins with the velocity of the wind. And what that does is it turns gears inside of a gearbox on the back of the windmill. The gears then create an up and down motion for what's called a pump rod. The pump rod, also known as a sucker rod, because what it does is whenever the sucker rod goes down into the pipe, there's a cylinder that sits on the bottom that acts like a plunger. And so as it pushes it down, there's a check valve inside of that cylinder that won't let the water go but one way. So as it goes down, it pushes water up and out the pipe, out for the livestock. It's kind of amazing that in 106 years, the logistics of this windmill hasn't changed one bit. Although the American windmill has been changed for the last hasn't been changed for the last 106 years, engineers have recently created a prototype of a water well wind pump that has somewhat of the same dynamics of the American windmill, but is supposed to be more economically efficient. According to KestrelWind.com, the Kestrel turbine is the next generation of wind turbines that also coincide and parallel with windmills and solar wells. This specific wind turbine is different from the American windmill for the simple fact that a wind turbine in difference makes and generates its own electricity and its own energy. This energy is then harvested in its own compartment. So whenever the wind is not blowing, which the American windmill needs, it needs that in order to pump water. Well, where this benefits the customer, the consumer, is that this Kestrel wind turbine is going to produce energy all the time. For whenever the wind is not blowing, it can still rely on its power source. Of course, in the 1970s, solar panels were being used to pump water whenever the wind couldn't. Such as an American windmill needs wind to pump. For a solar, of course, it needs sun to pump. So spectators are believing that this new KE300 wind turbine, Kestrel E300, is going to outproduce both the American windmill and the solar well. Today I've discussed a few topics including the origin of the windmill, the mechanics of the windmill, and the transition into the new American windmill.